Right now, he's ignoring you, and it feels like silence. But beneath that silence lives a story he doesn't have the courage to face. Not about you, about himself. You replay his absence like a broken film reel, trying to understand what you did wrong. You scroll through the past, every word, every look, every moment that felt real, and you ask yourself the question every woman has whispered into a pillow soaked with quiet pain. Why did he pull away? Why is he gone now, when everything felt alive just days ago? But I need you to hear this, not as comfort and not as advice. What I'm about to tell you is not about getting him back. It's not about tactics or texting games or playing cool. This is a mirror held up to his psyche, and it might just be the first time someone told you the truth. Because what if I told you that his silence isn't power, that his distance isn't strength? What if the man who's ignoring you is actually the one who's afraid? Afraid of what you awakened in him, afraid of what he saw reflected back in your eyes, afraid that if he stayed, he'd have to feel. See, when a man hasn't faced himself, when he's fractured, unintegrated, still ruled by shadows he hasn't named, a woman who sees him too clearly terrifies him. Because you didn't just smile, you mirrored something sacred, and he didn't have the capacity to meet it. So he vanished. But don't confuse silence for indifference. Don't confuse absence for apathy. There's a battlefield inside of him, and your presence lit the match. And now, the man who left without a word is standing in the ruins of something he couldn't handle. This video isn't here to help you win him. It's here to show you never lost, because what he ignored was never you. It was the mirror you held up to his soul, and he couldn't look. To understand the silence of a man, you have to go far beneath the surface of behavior, because what looks like indifference is rarely what it seems. Carl Jung taught us that the human psyche is not linear, logical, or even fully knowable. It is a house of mirrors, ruled by shadows, symbols, and unspoken fears. And when a man ignores a woman who once stirred something in him, he is not exercising control. He is avoiding a confrontation with himself. Let's begin here, with the shadow. Jung called it the part of us we hide, suppress, or deny, the disowned self. And for most men, the shadow is heavy with things they were never allowed to express: grief, fear, tenderness, the ache of being vulnerable in a world that told them not to be. So when you, in your presence, your intuition, your knowing, activate something raw in him, his first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to retreat, to preserve the illusion of control by disappearing. Because to feel deeply, vulnerably, without armor, would mean letting the shadow surface. And he spent a lifetime outrunning it. That's the weakness. Not that he left, but that he didn't have the courage to stay. He didn't ignore you because you were too much. He ignored you because your presence brought him too close to himself. Too close to the places he's never dared to enter. The truth? A woman connected to her emotional depth will always awaken something in a man who is disconnected from his own. And that brings us to projection. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most men, that mirror feels too clear, too confronting. When he saw you, really saw you, he also saw the parts of himself he couldn't integrate. The softness, the longing, the need. So instead of owning those feelings, he projects them onto you. He tells himself you're too emotional, you're too intense, you're the problem. Because it's easier to make the mirror wrong than to face what's being reflected. This is not malice, it's defense. Unconscious, instinctive, and rooted in emotional immaturity. And perhaps the most threatening reflection you offer him is not your emotions, but your light. Because there's a part of him, his anima, in Jungian terms, that you bring to life. The anima is the feminine soul image that lives inside every man. It's his capacity for empathy, for receptivity, for feeling. And when he hasn't developed that relationship within, when his inner feminine is exiled, neglected, or distorted, a real woman who embodies presence and depth will unsettle him. You become the external embodiment of his internal lack. You stir the very qualities he's disowned in himself. So what does he do? He tries to control the situation by withdrawing, by holding back affection, by turning his absence into a test he hopes you will fail. But here's the truth. His withdrawal isn't strategy, it's a smokescreen for fear. Because the moment he met you, something started to awaken. An awakening is messy, uncomfortable, unpredictable, And that violates the illusion he's built around himself, that he is in control, that he is above feeling, that nothing and no one can shake him. But you did. So instead of facing that truth, he retreats to a place that feels familiar. Distance. Detachment. Disconnection. He tells himself a story that you were moving too fast, that you were too available, that something felt off. But these are not truths. These are defenses against the rising tide inside him, and this is where his greatest weakness is born. He doesn't leave because he's over you. He leaves because staying means evolving, and evolution requires ego death. He'd have to drop the mask. He'd have to feel grief that's lived in him since childhood. He'd have to look at the way he's avoided intimacy his whole life. And most men? They're not ready for that level of honesty. So he chooses the easier path. Ghost. Withdraw. Ignore. But don't mistake that for emotional mastery. Don't mistake that for strength. Because it takes far more strength to stay present in the fire than to disappear into silence. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This man isn't in control. He's being controlled. Controlled by the very emotions he refuses to name, by the shadows he won't face, by the love he secretly craves, but doesn't know how to hold. So yes, he ignores you. But not because you didn't matter. Because you did. Because something in you stirred the sleeping parts of him, the parts that want to feel, that want to be seen, that want to belong. But wanting and being willing are two very different things. And the space between those two is where so many women get lost. Trying to become palatable enough, perfect enough, pleasing enough to coax him back across that emotional divide. But hear this. You didn't scare him because of how you acted. You scared him because of what you made him feel. And he doesn't yet have the strength to live in a world where feeling deeply is allowed. So he folds, he fades, he disappears, and all you're left with is the echo. But that echo isn't your emptiness, it's his. It's the sound of a man who cannot yet carry what he asked you to bring to the surface. So if you've been wondering what his silence means, it means he lost the battle with his own becoming. And that has nothing to do with your worth. It has everything to do with his fear. If something I've said so far is landing in your heart, pause for a moment, give this video a like, and subscribe right now. Not for me, but for the version of you that's finally seeing clearly. You deserve more of this clarity, because clarity is the beginning of freedom. And now that we've named the psychology beneath the silence, it's time to walk into the next layer. Not the surface signals, but the hidden spiral of weakness that unfolds inside a man the moment he realizes he's losing the one thing he thought he could take for granted. You may think he walked away untouched, unmoved, unbothered, living his life with quiet confidence while you've been left unraveling. But let me show you what you can't see from where you're standing. Because what looks like stillness on the outside is often a storm he doesn't know how to name. When a man ignores a woman who moved something inside him, a spiral begins. Not a spiral of power, but of internal conflict. And each stage of that spiral reveals a weakness he will never speak aloud, but one he will feel in silence. Let's begin. 1. Emotional avoidance. His first weakness is the instinct to run from what he feels. Not because the feeling isn't there, but because the feeling is too big. You stirred something in him. A flicker of vulnerability. A softness he hadn't felt in years. A longing he thought he had buried. And rather than sit with it, he does what the emotionally unready man always does. He ghosts it, suppresses it, distracts from it. But here's what he doesn't realize. Avoided emotion doesn't die. It waits. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." So every time he suppresses the ache you awakened, it festers. Not because of you, but because of the part of himself he cannot yet hold. His silence is not peace. It is a wall built around a war. 2. Fear of vulnerability. Next comes fear, the kind that doesn't roar, but hides behind passive behaviors. He stops replying, he delays answers, he says, "I just need space." But what's really happening is this. He fears that if he stays connected to you, you'll see him. Not the version he performs, but the soft boy beneath the armor. And that visibility, that nakedness, terrifies him. You didn't scare him because you were needy. You scared him because your presence asked him to be real, and he doesn't know how. Because in his world, vulnerability has always been a risk, and your eyes, They asked him to take that risk. He couldn't, so he left. 3. The illusion of control. He believes he holds the upper hand, that by pulling away you will chase, that your need for closure will keep the lines open, that your confusion will drive you back to him. And for a while, it might, because the feminine heart, when open, wants to understand. It wants resolution. But here's the crack in his illusion. He thinks he has time. He thinks you'll wait. He thinks silence doesn't have consequences. That belief is his blind spot, and ultimately his downfall, because one day you stop answering, you stop checking, you stop needing, and the power he thought he had vanishes. What he called space becomes a canyon he can't cross. Jung said, the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. He convinced himself his detachment made sense, but sense cannot hold the heart. And now he feels the loss, and it's too late. 4. Projection of shame. Here's what he won't say. You reminded him of everything he hasn't become, the way you carry yourself, the way you feel without apologizing, the way you hold space for depth he hasn't yet earned. To a man who lives shallow, depth feels like judgment, not because you judged him, but because he judged himself in your presence. And when shame arises in the male psyche, it doesn't soften, it lashes out in the form of coldness, withdrawal, dismissiveness. But underneath, a little boy who doesn't feel worthy of being loved by someone like you. So instead of growing into the man who could meet you, he pushes you away. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't believe he was enough. 5. Internal testing. Men test not to hurt, but to see what they can get away with. Unconsciously, he pulls away to watch. Will she chase? Will she hold on? Will she prove she's safe? Because safety, to a man raised in emotional chaos, looks like loyalty to his inconsistency. If you stay after he withdraws, he tells himself, she'll tolerate this, I'm still in control. But if you walk, if you center yourself, redirect your energy, and make no dramatic exit, he's left with something he didn't predict. Emptiness. That's when the spiral deepens. Because now he must ask, did I lose her, or did I just reveal I never had her to begin with? 6. The collapse of ego validation. Most men don't know how much they rely on your admiration until it's gone. Your laughter, your eyes lighting up when he walks in, your softness when you speak his name. It all fed something inside him, a fragile identity built on how he was seen by you. And the moment you stop seeing him that way, he starts to feel it. Not consciously at first, but in the sudden need to scroll through your stories, the random likes, the messages that say everything and nothing all at once. That's not connection. That's a search for reflection. Because when your attention disappears, he stops seeing himself as powerful. And now, he's left staring into the mirror, trying to remember who he was before your love made him feel real. Jung said, man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. This is his difficulty. To either evolve into the man who can generate his own worth, or keep searching for women to mirror it back. But your reflection is gone, and he feels it. 7. Disorientation by your absence. This is the moment it all collapses. When you, in silence and in sovereignty, do not return. Not with questions, not with anger, not with tears. You vanish, not as a tactic, but as a truth. Because when a woman remembers her worth, she no longer negotiates with inconsistency, and he feels it. At first it's subtle, a tightness in the chest, a memory triggered by a song, a sudden pang of nostalgia he can't place. Then it becomes heavier. He sees someone who looks like you. He hears your name in a crowd, and it echoes in a way he didn't expect. Because now, the woman he took for granted has become a symbol. Not of guilt, but of what he couldn't hold. He will never say it, but something in him knows. He lost something that could have changed him. And here's the final twist of the spiral. His greatest weakness was not that he ignored you. It's that he assumed you'd be waiting when he came back. But you didn't wait. You grew. You expanded. You became unavailable, not to punish, but because your new life no longer fits his absence. And that realization cuts deeper than any silence ever could. He will remember you not as the woman who chased, but as the woman who left the door open just long enough for him to become. And when he didn't, you closed it, not with vengeance, but with grace. And that is power. That is the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. That is the absence he will never recover from. Because while he was busy holding back love to feel powerful, You learned that your love is not a gift to be begged for. It is a gift to be earned. And now, he must live with the echo of what he was never ready to receive. Let's keep going. Because what comes next might be the very thing that frees you. Because it's not just what he did, it's what we as women have been conditioned to do in response to it. Let's talk about the mistakes we make in the face of male withdrawal, and how reclaiming your inner power is not a strategy, but a sacred return to yourself. Let's tell the truth now. Because yes, he pulled away. He went silent. He ignored the connection as if it were disposable. But here's the deeper cut. What did you do in response? This isn't blame. This is reclamation. Because somewhere inside the spiral of his avoidance, you began to shrink to fit the shape of his absence. You started to wonder, was I too much? You scrolled through conversations, decoding every line. You watched his stories, waited for his replies, and in quiet desperation, you made his attention the metric of your worth. And you are not alone. So many women, strong, wise, intuitive women, fall into the same silent trap, over-efforting to stay visible to a man who has already chosen not to see them. Why? Because we were taught that love must be earned. That if someone pulls away, we must prove ourselves. That if we're ignored, we must shine harder. We perform, we reach, we rationalize. We interpret his silence as a challenge to overcome instead of a signal to release. But here's what you need to hear. You were never meant to beg for what's sacred. You were never supposed to contort yourself into a smaller, quieter version just to keep someone interested. Because the moment you begin performing for approval, you are no longer living in your sovereignty. You are dancing in his shadow. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." So let's look. What wound made you feel you had to be chosen in order to be enough? Was it the fear of being alone? The story that says, if I don't win his attention, I've failed. Whatever it is, it's not yours to carry anymore. Because when a man ignores you, and you keep giving, keep reaching, keep trying to fix what he won't even name, you reinforce his illusion of power. You become an accomplice in the story that says, he gets to decide if I'm worthy. But here's the truth. You were not ignored. You were never seen clearly to begin with. And that's the ache, isn't it? Not just that he walked away, but that he never really held the real you while he was here. He held the idea, the version that didn't scare him, the woman who didn't yet know how much she was worth. But now you do. And this is the moment everything shifts. Because when you stop trying to prove yourself and start choosing to protect your energy, you exit his illusion entirely. You step out of the role he cast you in, the pleaser, the pursuer, the peacekeeper. And you return to yourself, not the wounded self, the rooted self. The woman who does not chase symbols of absence. The woman who does not dance for crumbs. The woman who knows silence does not mean she's unworthy. It means he lacks the depth to meet her where she stands. Because feminine power, real feminine power, is not loud but unwavering. It doesn't plead, it doesn't chase. It receives or releases. Let me say that again. You do not chase. You receive or you release. That's your new paradigm. Because you are not here to be chosen by someone who cannot even choose himself. You are here to choose you, over and over again. And when you do, something miraculous happens. You stop responding to his silence. You stop playing in the field of what-ifs and maybe he'll change. You stop waiting for the apology he doesn't have the language for. Instead, you begin speaking fluently with your boundaries, with your energy, with your absence. Because absence from a woman who knows herself is not punishment, it's protection. It says, I will not be available to someone who is unavailable to themselves. And the power in that clarity, it's electric. You don't have to send a message. You don't have to explain. Your energy will tell him everything, and if he is capable of growth, he will feel it. If not, he will vanish deeper into his patterns. But either way, you are free. Because your liberation was never tied to his recognition. You were never waiting for him to see your worth. You were waiting for you to see it. And now that you do, everything changes. You remember who you are before the shrinking, before the proving, before the story that told you love must be earned with self-sacrifice. Now you know, love that asks you to abandon yourself is not love. It is a lesson, an initiation, a threshold, and you've crossed it. So let me speak to that part of you, The part still healing, still remembering, still learning to breathe without the weight of his attention. You are not too much. You are not too emotional. You are not wrong for wanting depth. You simply reached for someone who didn't have the capacity to hold it. And that doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. And now, it makes you whole. Because you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be powerful, not loud, not forceful, but clear. Soft-spined and steel-hearted. A woman who no longer asks, why did he leave? But instead says, if he couldn't meet me here, then he was never meant to stay. You don't punish him, you don't perform for him. You simply rise, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. And from that height, you no longer seek his voice to validate your existence. You become the voice, the mirror, the medicine. And that is the moment he feels your absence. Not as silence, but as sovereignty. Not as rejection, but as revelation. Because in losing you, he didn't lose attention. He lost access to something sacred. And in just a moment, we'll close with the reflection that will stay with you long after this video ends. But first, take this in. If something I've said today brought back to yourself, brought you out of confusion, out of shrinking, out of over-efforting, pause here. Give this video a like. Subscribe not for me, but for the woman in you who is no longer afraid of her own enoughness. Because she is the one who never has to chase again. He may never say it. He may never text you the truth. Never call you in the quiet hours to admit what you meant. Never sit across from you and confess that it wasn't your presence that scared him. It was your clarity, your softness, your truth, and most of all, the reflection you offered. Because in your eyes he saw the man he could have become. If only he had been brave enough to stay. He will tell himself other stories. That he wasn't ready, that you were moving too fast, that it just didn't feel right, but you'll know better, because you were there, present, rooted, open, and what he walked away from was not chaos, it was peace, the kind of peace that only threatens a man still at war with himself. So let this land, you are not the one who was abandoned, you are the one he couldn't face. And that is not your flaw. That is his fracture. You were not too much, you were the mirror. And he flinched at the sight of his own unfinished self. So don't dim your light to fit someone else's blindness. Don't explain your intuition to someone who cannot hear it, and don't shrink just to stay standing in someone else's shadow. Because you are the sun he tried to stare into before he was ready. You don't need closure from him. You already have it. It's the silence he now sits with, the one that echoes your absence louder than your presence ever did. So ask yourself now, not, why did he leave? But, what part of him did I awaken that he couldn't carry? And then, let it go. Not with bitterness, but with grace. Because the woman who knows her own light doesn't chase those who run from its warmth. She walks on, and she shines. And if this opened your eyes, if something inside you softened, healed, or remembered its worth, honor that. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to stay connected, but to remind yourself, you never again have to beg to be seen. Because you already are, by you.